My overriding impression was that Zuzana was determined to bear witness to history, not just of the war years, but of the decades afterwards, which were often extremely challenging. I will be forever humbled by her courage and resilience in the face of so much suffering, prejudice, and adversity. In spite of all that she endured, she remained a life-enhancing spirit who wished the world to know that she'd been healed by music and the love of her mother and husband. It has been one of the greatest privileges of my life to fulfill that wish. Wendy Holden, London 2018. Chapter 1. Cebu, Transylvania, 1960. Welcome, comrade. The cultural director greeted me as warmly as ever in the remote Transylvanian city of Cebu. A million thanks for coming back. We can't wait to hear you play for us again. It was the winter of 1960, and it had taken me the best part of a day to travel there from Kiev. When I eventually arrived alone, via a flight to Bucharest, and then an ancient steam train that seemed to take forever to snake across the country, I was tired and extremely hungry. My latest 3-week recital tour of factories, shipyards, schools, colleges, and state buildings, the 10th that year, had been especially grueling in the bitter cold of Ukraine, the Soviet Union, and Poland. Kiev had been particularly challenging, with an odd director who'd threatened not to pay me. I was desperate to go home to my family in Prague after this, my penultimate concert for the authorities that year. I knew from previous visits to medieval Cebu that my accommodation and my long-awaited supper would be basic. Fortunately, I had a little salami and a spare tin of sardines left in my suitcase, as well as a supply of Russian cigarettes. Of all the other Eastern Bloc countries I was obliged to perform in under the socialists, Romania was one of the hardest hit by dreadful poverty and a pervading sense of despair. The people of this former Hungarian province had suffered terribly at the hands of President Georgiu Dej and his senior minister, Nicolae Ceausescu, and were even more starved of contact with the outside world than we Czechs. I remember one trip to Timisoara where the hotel was so terrible, with such an insanely dirty bathtub, that I was afraid there would be bedbugs. I unpacked my little suitcase that my dear mum had packed so carefully for me, and I started crying over it. I said to myself, if only my mum could see what kind of environment I was unpacking that little case in. In Cebu, conditions were much the same, yet the musical director, who was thrilled by the arrival of any artist under the state cultural programme, somehow managed to lift my spirits every time. So grateful was he that I'd once again agreed to include his city in my itinerary. Everything is ready for you in your quarters, he assured me, words that had gladdened my heart on my first visit there a few years earlier, until I saw my unheated room. With a blizzard predicted that bitter November night, I'd probably be sleeping in my coat. My recital of early music the following evening would be in the hall of a building that doubled as a cinema. Accompanied by Cebu's enthusiastic musicians, I didn't expect it to be my most memorable performance, but I knew that the appreciation would be genuine and heartfelt. Long before I pulled on the green velvet ball gown that my mother had had her seamstress make for me, however, I was paraded around town as usual, having my photograph taken with Communist Party officials at the administrative headquarters before visiting workplaces and schools. The pupils were always most receptive, especially if they had musical ambitions, and seemed to regard me as a kind of celebrity. In one classroom that day, I spoke to a group who were the same age I had been when Hitler finally invaded Czechoslovakia, 12 years old. As always, I shared with them my passion for music and my deep connection with Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was love at first hearing when I was only 8 years old, I told them. In answer to their many questions, I explained why I'd not only dedicated my life to music, but switched from the piano to the harpsichord. Some people think of the harpsichord as a feudal instrument, a 16th century wooden artifact that belongs in a museum.